Well, joining me now for more on the Queensland election is Redbridge Group Director Simon Welsh. Simon, good morning to you. Lovely to see you. As we just heard there, Mr Crisafulli has a big job ahead of him to deliver on those election promises. What did you make of the weekend's results? We're really seeing this inversion again.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. That to me was sort of the big thing coming out of the result. The sort of what's the strategic implication here. I think this inversion that we're seeing, where every time now we have an election, we see Labor losing votes in once working class communities. Big swings in those sorts of communities, not little swings. We are talking, in many cases, double-digit swings. In this particular election, that was enough for them to lose a whole bunch of those sort of regional working class seats. But those swings occurred in the outer suburbs of Brisbane as well. We shouldn't forget that while Labor held those ones, that's a pattern we've seen again and again now in repeated election, where those outer suburban seats are swinging hard against Labor, but they're managing to hold on to them because they've got big margins, or had big margins out there before these swings occurred. So I think, the strategic lesson for this is, sort of Labor's now become a party very much of sort of the middle suburbs and the middle classes. It's losing that outer suburban support, and it needs to find an answer to that, because we know that federally, that's where the Liberals will go hunting and looking for the seats to pick up to gain government next time they go around. So this inversion, this switch that we're seeing, and it's not just an Australian thing. It's a thing we are seeing across the world. It's a global trend of this sort of progressive left movements that have come out of working communities are now sort of losing those sorts of support. So that, I think, is the big strategic lesson. I think there's some challenges going forward now for Premier Crisafulli, is in terms of, even though those communities have kind of delivered him this result, and yes, they're going to make a bit of a foothold in Brisbane and those sorts of things, and they're going to end up with a fairly comfortable margin in the end, is those communities we know are becoming the most volatile. And the idea, I don't think either major party can rely on those communities for sort of dependable support in the next electoral cycle. So I think the challenge now for Crisafulli is to really govern for the seats that they would like to win at the next election, which is really start to think about how they get into those, those central Brisbane, middle suburban Brisbane seats where they've got a little bit of a foothold, but they will need to increase their profile there to sort of provide a bit of insurance against the volatility that's increasing in a lot of those sort of regional outer suburban seats.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned there about just the change in nature of what we're seeing in those regional working class electorates, and in contrast, I guess, the middle class, for example, Brisbane voters, there's a real change there. And as you mentioned, we're not just seeing it in Queensland, it potentially is going to translate federally as well. We heard Jim Chalmers talk yesterday about there are many lessons to learn for this, for the federal government in the upcoming election. What are those lessons that will be learnt now? I guess, how will the federal government change its direction to learn from the weekend's results?
Yeah, look, I think those communities are swinging hard. Those once Labor-based, the once red wall communities that are swinging hard. It is all about sort of economic stress. It is all about years of sort of neglect and multiple governments of neglect of their communities in terms of public services, that are impacting quality of life. And you layer on top of that the immediate sort of cost of living pressures that people have been experiencing. There's a massive job to be done, particularly by Labor, because Labor was supposed to be their team. Labor was supposed to be the one that was looking after them. So the expectations are always a little bit higher on Labor. So there's a massive job to be done to convince these communities again that they are serious and they are interested in looking after the interests of these communities, that they're not retreating to look after sort of other communities, wealthier communities, that they're more interested in them, because that's what people in the focus groups tell us, that they see Labor abandoning them in favour of other sort of, voter cohorts. They worry about the swinging voters, the marginal seats, and they get forgotten. So I think those sort of forgotten seats for Labor, speaking to them with a real economic narrative is absolutely vital.
A couple of key things moving forward. Will David Crisafulli and Peter Dutton's different views on nuclear be an issue moving forward, do you think? And also on that as well, I mean, the abortion issue is likely going to be mentioned as well in the federal upcoming election within the next 6 months too.
Yeah, look, I think bit of speculation, but I think Queensland Liberals particularly in that sort of the Crisafulli Dutton level, tend to run a pretty disciplined ship. I think they will be pretty careful about how they handle the nuclear issue between the two of them. They won't want to set up a sort of a fight in the public domain around that. They'll both be conscious of the implications of that electorally if that does happen. So I think they'll try to be careful of that. Whether they can do that, whether they can pull that off, it remains to be seen. And equally, I think on the abortion issue, I think that was really pushed by certain personalities within this election. I would be surprised if Dutton allows that to sort of raise to the level that it raised in this election. But again, whether he can control those aspects of the party and those conservative voices remains to be seen.
Simon Welsh, thank you as always. Great to see you. We'll talk to you soon.